We teach people to live by a guiding question. We say it's just simple to ask, what does love require of me in this situation?
Thanks for joining us today at Faith Ignited, during our question and answer session with our pastor, Aaron Shivington. Aaron, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Michael Bridges, executive pastor, and we love answering your questions. Aaron, I got a question for you today.
All right.
Somebody wrote in, why should I believe in Jesus? Why is believing in Jesus better than believing in Allah or Buddha or this table or anything else?
So my quick response would be because it's true. If we start with saying I care about truth, then believing in Jesus matters. If we don't care about truth, then believe whatever you want to believe. Would be my simple answer. Now, fleshing that out is the second piece. But again, just start with why should I believe in Jesus? Because it's true, and therefore it changes everything. So a couple thoughts. First of all, there are two mistakes that people often make. One, that there is a belief that Jesus is just a good moral teacher. Of course, C.S. Lewis comes back and says, Jesus did not leave us that option. He claimed himself to be God. And so he can be a liar, a lunatic, or God, but he can't be just a good moral teacher. Now, it is fair to say Jesus is a good moral teacher, right? It's not that he isn't a good moral teacher, but that's not all he is.
He isn't only a good moral teacher.
And so if you stop and say that's all he is, then that's incorrect. But it is also true that he is a good moral teacher, but he claimed to be God, and therefore you go, okay, then he's a lunatic if he's just a good moral teacher. And so we extract moral teachings from a lunatic. But the other piece that we often see people mistake is that, again, Jesus is one of many gods, and we kind of harmonize and mix them together, and that's where we maybe get the question of Allah or Buddha. And the difference is that Allah is God in the sense of what you and I would call God or Yahweh. The prophet is Muhammad. So we're not really comparing apples to apples there. Buddha is the prophet for Buddhism. But Muhammad and Buddha did not claim to be God. Jesus claimed to be God incarnate in the flesh for us. And so the major distinction there would be that Jesus himself, again, claimed to be God and therefore revealed who God is. Now, again, when we say, well, because it's true, what are the evidences for the truth? Well, we always start with the resurrection. And I think we've done a video or two on the resurrection, but the evidence for the resurrection is so overwhelming that, again, right now you don't see anybody really debate that.
Right.
Because you can't stand apart from the resurrection and go, here's the evidence that's against it and why we shouldn't buy into it. You just got to throw it out and say, well, I don't believe in any miracles, therefore the resurrection didn't happen, therefore the whole story's made up. Why? Because again, the historical, archaeological, documented evidence for the resurrection is so sound that anybody who begins to study it, and we see this over and over in our culture, ultimately is converted and believes.
And Aaron, no one and nothing has ever been studied as much as Jesus Christ.
Right. And that's from both the church and people outside the church, from believers and those who aren't believers, from people who want to disprove it, and people who don't want it to be right. Because again, once you arrive at the truth that Jesus was who he said he was, you have to now say, well, am I going to submit? Am I going to allow him to be Lord of my life and submit my will to his? Which is why I would argue most people don't ultimately take the next step, is because if I'm going to acknowledge that this is true, that should change everything about my life. And I don't really want Jesus to be in charge of my morals.
Right.
So the first place is because it's true. But someone may object here and say, well, you can't prove Jesus is true. You can't prove that the resurrection is true. Okay, we would ask them, well, what is your definition of proof? If it's 100%, like there's no doubt anywhere, then I would argue you can't prove anything to be true. Again, in our judicial system, it's beyond reasonable doubt. Why? Because, again, philosophically, we know nothing can be proven 100%. But
Aaron, if that's the case, why do I believe George Washington ever existed? Why do I believe anything ever existed? I can't go back in time and see it myself. So should I just doubt everything? Does nothing exist?
Right, and the point there is that we often apply a different standard to God and Jesus
Yes.
than we do to all the other information in the world. So yeah, again, if it's just beyond reasonable doubt, Jesus is going to be able to meet your criteria. If it's 100%, and again, nothing is believable, including the fact that you exist. So again, to that objection, I always reply, well, what is your standard of evidence? What is it you will accept as evidence? And then I always like Frank Turek's statement, if we could prove Jesus were true, would you convert? Would you believe and follow?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm always amazed as I watch the videos, and I've got to meet Frank Turek and have some conversation with him a little bit, but that he'll say, like, you'd be amazed how many people will say no. Like, even if it's true, oh, the truth doesn't matter to me here. Which is fascinating because I think the truth should matter to us in several different places. I think it should matter when we go visit our doctor. If my doctor says you have cancer, I'm going to prescribe medicine. I want A, to know that I do have cancer and the medicine you're prescribing is going to help.
Right.
Truth matters when I go to make a withdrawal at the bank. It matters when the officer pulls me over and says, do you know how fast you're going? It matters when I tell someone I love them. Because if I'm not telling the truth, again, I'm going to harm some people,
Right.
including myself. It also matters when I'm talking about eternity and my relationship with God. And so again, why should I believe in Jesus? Because truth matters, because my eternity, my relationship with God rests on this decision and this fact. So why should I believe in Jesus? Because it's true. Because there's evidence both inside and outside the Bible from archaeology and history to say that Jesus existed. The resurrection is almost an undeniable fact. And then because I'm concerned about truth, because it impacts my relationship with God for all eternity. So if I really love others and I care about myself, then I'm gonna be concerned about this.
Yeah. Aaron, I believe for every person there is a heaven to gain and a hell to shun. There's no middle ground. There's no, I didn't really want to play this game. So if I'm just an agnostic or frankly an atheist, just count me out. And certainly, Hitler and these other bad people are going to go to hell, and some of you might go to heaven, but I'll be fine. Well, we're all going to die. We don't know when. If there's a heaven to gain and a hell to shun, then every person has to decide what they're going to do with Jesus.
Right.
They can accept him, believe him, make him Lord and Savior of their life. They can reject him. We all have that free will that we can do whatever we choose to do, but there's no middle ground.
Right.
It's either you're pick one or the other, because ultimately there is a hell to shun, heaven to gain, and we all will be held accountable for making a decision. Right.
So that's a great point, because at the end of the day, my response is because Jesus is the solution to evil. And what I mean is that it's undeniable that there's evil, it's undeniable that there's suffering.
Absolutely.
And again, you can't get definitions of evil and suffering apart from the biblical worldview, because you have to have an objective view. But here's where I really, again, after someone gets by the intellectual concepts and begins to move into their heart, I would say, because by believing in Jesus, because it's true, he's true, it makes sense of everything else. It explains meaning, morality, destiny, all right, and it explains evil. And Jesus is God's response to evil. When you say, Jesus, where were you when I was hurting? Jesus, where were you when I was being abused? Jesus, where were you when this was going on? What is your response, God, to the evil that's in the world? That's the moment when we turn to the cross and God goes, this is my response. I came to pay, to give my life as an atonement for sin, yes, for your sin. And the response to why is evil in the world is because I have allowed evil to exist because I gave you free will, but I've come to rescue you. And back to your point, to give you a pathway to reconnect with.
Yes, yes.
And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the light. No one comes unto the Father except through me. So the only way to understand the world, and again, this is why truth matters, is to believe in Jesus. And it doesn't mean things are going to be better once you believe. It means that suddenly the world makes sense.
Yes.
Because, again, if Jesus is true, all other worldviews are a lie. and therefore ultimately they break down and don't make sense. But if Jesus is true, this is the only one that makes coherent and coincides or corresponds with reality.
Aaron, question. You said if you need to believe in Jesus. There are people who have what we call intellectual assent. It's like, yeah, I believe he existed. I believe just like other historical characters existed. That's not exactly what you're talking about, though.
Right. And here I'd make a distinction between belief that and belief in.
Yes.
Belief that means I believe that Jesus is God. It's an intellectual, or just yes, he existed historically. Belief in means I put my trust in. Often we like to call it, are you a disciple of Christ, or are you just someone who believes that Jesus existed?
Yes.
Because if you're a follower, that changes everything. So yeah, good point.
Aaron, thank you very much as always. Appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah.
Check us out at www.faithignited.church. Also, our Facebook and YouTube accounts. Check those out and like them. And send us your questions. Thanks for joining us.